All right, let's dive into the fascinating world of Thaksinomics. We're looking at the economic policies of Thaksin Shinawatra, a leader who's really left his mark on Thailand. He's known for these bold moves to tackle debt, both for the country as a whole and for individuals.
Yeah, his approach has definitely generated a lot of buzz, both good and bad. And we've got a really interesting mix of sources to unpack here. We've got articles covering his policies over a span of decades, from 2003 to his latest plans in 2024.
Wow, that's quite a range.
Right. And of course, we've got analyses of his famous Thaksinomics strategy. And to get a different perspective, we'll even be looking at a critical take from a Global South think tank.
I'm hooked already. So where do we even begin with this roller coaster economic policies?
Well, to really understand Thaksinomics, we need to go back to 2003. It was a pivotal year for Thaksin and for Thailand. His popularity was sky high, and a lot of that stemmed from his decision to pay off Thailand's debt to the IMF early.
The IMF debt, right? That was from the 1997 Asian financial crisis, wasn't it?
Exactly. Back then, Thailand, along with a bunch of other Southeast Asian countries, was hit with this huge economic downturn, and the IMF stepped in with a bailout package. But those loans came with strings attached.
So I'm guessing those strings weren't very popular.
Not really. Often these IMF loans required countries to implement some pretty tough austerity measures. And they also had to open up their economies to more foreign investment, which some people saw as a loss of control.
So in that context, I can see why paying off the IMF early would be such a big deal for Thaksin.
Oh, absolutely. It was a symbolic victory, a way of declaring Thailand's economic independence and throwing off the influence of foreign powers. When he announced the final payment, Thaksin actually said, and I quote, "We shall never go back to the days of the IMF again as long as I am in office."
Whoa, that's a powerful statement. It really paints him as a leader who's putting Thailand first.
Yeah.
But was there a downside to this move?
Well, there are always different perspectives, right? While most people loved the early repayment, some critics argued it was more about boosting Thaksin's image than making sound economic decisions. They were worried that his nationalistic stance might make people overlook the need for important economic reforms.
That's a really interesting point. It makes you think about debt as more than just a financial issue, but also a political tool.
Right. Thaksin was very savvy, very good at connecting with people on an emotional level. He really tapped into that feeling of national pride.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about how Thaksin actually tried to impact everyday people. One program that stands out is his Village Fund. Can you tell me more about that?
Sure. The Village Fund was a key part of Thaksinomics. It was all about revitalizing rural economies, which had been really struggling, especially after the 1997 crisis. Many farmers were deeply in debt, and the traditional banks were really hesitant to lend them any more money.
So Thaksin basically created an alternative to the banks.
Precisely. The Village Fund offered these small, low-interest loans directly to rural communities. They bypassed the banks entirely and empowered villagers to invest in their own businesses.
That sounds pretty innovative. Do we have any examples of how this played out in real life?
We do. There's this story of a farmer near Chiang Mai, Narong Phong Kro. He actually credits the Village Fund with saving his farm and his community. The loan allowed him to hire more workers, which led to a bigger harvest and helped him get out of debt.
That's fantastic. But I have to wonder, were there any concerns about whether this program could be sustained over the long term?
It's a valid question. While the Village Fund definitely had some success stories, there were worries about potential downsides. Some people argued it could lead to a cycle of debt if the villagers weren't able to repay their loans. And there were cases where people ended up turning to high-interest moneylenders just to pay back their Village Fund loans.
That defeats the purpose entirely. So it sounds like this kind of program would need to be managed very carefully.
You're absolutely right. And this leads us to another fascinating aspect of Thaksinomics, his approach to governing. He often talked about running Thailand like a big corporation, with himself as the CEO.
Ah, the CEO state. I've heard that term. It's intriguing. I'm picturing cabinet meetings that feel like board meetings.
Well, maybe not quite like that, but the idea of the CEO state was about applying corporate management style to the government. Thaksin was all about efficiency, competition, getting results. He wanted to streamline decision-making and attract foreign investment.
So basically running the country like a well-oiled business. I'm curious, were there any specific influences on this model?
There were. Thaksin's model drew a lot of inspiration from Sharon Pakpan, or CP for short, which is a really powerful Thai agribusiness conglomerate.
CP, I don't think I'm familiar with them.
Well, they're huge. They have a global presence, a major player in the agri-food industry. They have this vision of Thailand becoming the kitchen of the world. And a lot of Thaksin's policies, especially his emphasis on agricultural exports, really aligned with that vision.
So we're seeing this convergence of corporate interests and government policy. It definitely makes you think about who's really benefiting from this CEO state model.
It's definitely something to consider. And this takes us to some of the more critical perspectives on Thaksinomics, particularly from a global South point of view. But we'll dive into those in the next part of our deep dive.
I'm ready to hear those critiques. We've covered so much ground already, from paying off the IMF to microloans to the CEO state. It's been quite a journey so far.
It has. And in the next part, we'll explore how Thaksin's policies fit into the bigger picture of global economics and look at all the different viewpoints surrounding his approach. Welcome back. I'm really looking forward to continuing our discussion of Thaksinomics and digging into some of the criticisms that have been leveled at his policies.
I am too. Last time, we were talking about how some of Thaksin's policies seem to benefit big corporations like CP. I'm really interested in hearing more about what that Global South think tank had to say. They had a pretty critical view, suggesting that Thaksin's focus on nationalism might have actually served U.S. imperial interests.
Yeah, their argument is really thought-provoking. Remember how Thaksin made that big move to pay off Thailand's debt to the IMF early? Well, this think tank suggests that all his talk against the IMF might have been more about image than substance.
So they're saying it was a calculated move to boost his popularity.
Exactly. They argue that even while he was publicly criticizing the IMF, he was actually implementing policies that aligned with U.S. economic goals, things like pushing for a free trade agreement between the U.S. and Thailand.
Wow, so it seems like he was playing a double game. Appealing to national pride on the one hand, but working within the existing global system on the other.
That's a great way to put it. They're essentially arguing that Thaksin used nationalism as a way to maintain his legitimacy, all while pursuing policies that actually benefited powerful corporations like CP. And ultimately, they say, these policies further integrated Thailand into the global capitalist system, which isn't necessarily a good thing from their perspective.
It really makes you question what national interest even means in today's globalized world. Are those two things even compatible anymore?
That's a huge question, and it highlights just how complex these issues are. The lines between what's considered national capital and what's foreign capital can get really blurry, especially in a country like Thailand, which has such a long history of engagement with the global market.
It definitely challenges those simplistic narratives we often hear about economic policy.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to keep in mind that these economic decisions almost always involve navigating competing interests and making tough choices. There's rarely a perfect solution.
Okay, so we've talked about the early years of Thaksinomics and explored some of the criticisms surrounding it, but I'm also curious about his vision for the future of Thailand. We have that source from 2024, a recent speech where he outlined some really ambitious proposals. What are some of the key takeaways there?
Well, one thing that's remained consistent throughout his career is his focus on debt relief. He's still deeply concerned about the high levels of household debt in Thailand. In fact, he's proposing some pretty radical solutions like debt restructuring programs where banks and the government would work together to help people get out of debt.
It sounds like he's trying to find new ways to address this issue, maybe learning from some of the potential downsides of programs like the Village Fund.
Yeah, I think that's a good observation. But his vision isn't just about fixing existing problems. He's also looking at ways to generate more revenue. And some of his ideas are a bit controversial. One of his proposals is to legalize and tax activities like gambling, which are currently part of Thailand's underground economy.
Whoa, that's a bold move. It could potentially bring in a lot of money, but wouldn't it also raise some ethical concerns?
Absolutely. It's a very complex issue. On the one hand, Thaksin argues that legalizing and regulating these activities would generate tax revenue that could be used to fund better social services, and it would allow the government to crack down on illegal operations. But on the other hand, critics are worried about the potential for increased crime and addiction.
Yeah, it's a tough one. You have to weigh the potential benefits against the risks.
For sure. And I think it reminds us that economics isn't just about numbers and statistics. It's about people's lives, their values, and the difficult choices societies have to make.
So what else is on Thaksin's agenda for 2024? What other areas is he focusing on? So last time we were talking about Thaksin's 2024 vision and that pretty controversial idea of legalizing and taxing things like gambling. It's definitely bold. What else is he looking at to try to boost Thailand's economy?
Well, infrastructure is a big one. He's really into investing in things like expanding airports and building high-speed rail lines. And get this, he even wants to create this huge entertainment complex to draw in foreign investment.
An entertainment complex. That's a pretty big idea.
Yeah.
What does he have in mind exactly?
He hasn't given us all the specifics yet, but it seems like he's thinking on a grand scale. Like we might be talking casinos, theme parks, concert venues, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
He wants to turn Thailand into a major tourist destination, a global entertainment hub.
I can see how that fits with his idea of Thailand as this global economic powerhouse. It's definitely a different approach from those austerity measures the IMF usually pushes for.
It is. Thaksin's not afraid to go big. He really believes that investing in infrastructure and key industries is crucial for economic growth and for raising Thailand's profile on the world stage.
It's a fascinating contrast in economic philosophies. But with all these grand plans, I can't help but wonder, is Thaksin's approach really going to benefit most Thai people? Or is it mainly going to help those big corporations and make Thailand even more dependent on global capitalism?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And honestly, there's no easy answer. I mean, we've seen how some of his policies, like the Village Fund, have had a positive impact on rural communities, but other policies have raised concerns about potential downsides.
It feels like there's always this trade-off, a balancing act between different interests and priorities.
You got it. And that's why it's so important to stay informed. Look at these issues from different angles. Have conversations about the best way forward for Thailand.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Thaksinomics, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing is to remember that economic policies are complex. They're not simple. They affect people's lives in profound ways, and they shape the future of a nation. I really encourage everyone to keep learning about these issues, question everything, and form your own opinions about Thaksin's legacy and the future of Thailand's economy.
Couldn't have said it better myself. This has been such an insightful journey exploring Thaksinomics and all the debates surrounding his policies. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure. And to all our listeners out there, keep asking those questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.